So I will focus mainly on the European legitimation crisis. Europe is ill not only with COVID, but with a lack of self-confidence in its own future. Europe, after centuries of war, division into blocs, and reconciliation ending up in a project of sharing common principles and values, appears now uncertain and tricked about how to continue or not on the way of institutional integration. Brexit was a shock, which puts the question of the participation of the people in the European construction. Jean Monnet, in the 50s of the last century, imagined that reconciliation could be obtained just by good institutions. So the coal and steel market would be integrated in such a way that no rivalry could develop between the member states of the first European form of union. Europe developed its institutions through treaties and bureaucracy, but apparently not in the mind and heart of the people. We are witnessing a fading trust in European institutions. I would deal with this issue, searching for the point which could bring Europeans back to a more convinced adhesion to the European project. It has been stated that institutional Europe functions rather well. South European countries drew a huge benefit from their access to the European Union in terms of economic development and creation of infrastructures. Europe helped Greece to overcome the government debt crisis in 2015. The European Council, meeting in December 2020, was able to adopt a general recovery plan, helping each member state to fight against the consequences of the pandemic crisis, and this for the first time. Other capital issues like climate change and immigration have also received common answers. The pandemic crisis manifested the width of solidarity among Europeans and of Europe towards poorer countries. This is not to be minimized. It shows that Europe does exist and does well. Nevertheless, the public are not enough involved in such a way that they would support and appreciate decisions taken in the interest of all. We are witnessing a growing trend of nationalistic revival, a sad rhetoric of self-sufficiency, a rush to build again borders and accuse the others of all the evils of the time. Not only is this discourse unrealistic, but it sheds a gloomy light on the degradation of our common European spirit. What is at stake is the question of the nation within or against a supranational construct. The confrontation between Monet and Pope John Paul is enlightening. For the latter, Europe exists thanks to the progress of its evangelization. Evangelization goes with the genesis of European nations, so the emergence of a Christian continent follows the same dynamic which created the European nations. Between the nation and Europe, there can be no antagonism. Pope John Paul dealt in a strong manner with both the nation and that community of nations, which is Europe. The fear that joining Europe would mean jeopardizing the nation is a wrong appreciation of what has been undertaken during the last 70 years. On the contrary, only by coordinating their policies, the European nations would be able to survive as such in a globalized world where the leading superpowers are elsewhere. The European institutions, unfortunately, appear to the public as a far and heavy bureaucracy. Medias emphasize this aspect, playing European rules against national sovereignty. The European institutions need to engage in a huge information campaign, which needs to be echoed by national media. After the fall of the wall in Berlin, Europe lost its particular meaning as an example for nations to overcome their conflicts and to engage in a future of mutual acceptance and cooperation. Europe threatened to dissolve in a global world, losing its position of economic and strategic leader. At the same time, Europe gave up its soul. I mean, its at least implicit commitment to its Christian roots. It should not be forgotten that our view of Europe was seriously modified through the teaching of John Paul II. Central and Eastern Europe became part of our European consciousness, awareness. John Paul put it clearly that Europe coincides with the dynamics of evangelizations towards the East, namely towards the Ural Mountains, the last to access to baptism being the Slavic peoples. As a son of Poland, John Paul insisted that two divisions of the past should be overcome: the ecclesial schism between the Latin and the Oriental churches in the year 1054, and the political division of Yalta. The latter has been forgotten after 1990. The ecumenical work between Catholics and Orthodox happily keeps on going. It must be stressed that in that view, Russia is part of Europe. The inner dilemma of Russia, pulled by its Mongol past as a nation, as in Asia, and a European nation, is not yet totally resolved. Russia is a member of the Council of Europe. With Russia, the religious balance between Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants is more or less equal in Europe. That means Christianity, in its main confessions, a huge patrimony of inspiration for the future. It is true that John Paul called for a new evangelization able to give a revival to the Christian roots of the European peoples. We know that this is not to be understood as a remake of the methods of the past. The gap between European proclaimed values and Christianity is enlarging in the field of the human person, the family, the openness to the spiritual dimension of existence. If one wonders where the decline of the European affects comes from, the answer is to be found precisely in the cultural sphere. The huge reconstruction of Europe and of the world after 1945 was still permeated by Christian values as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the European Convention of 1950 bear witness. Among these values are the central importance of human dignity, the mutual independence of political and religious organizations, the family, the state under the rule of law, and the accountability of states to international judiciary recognized bodies. 60 years later, the whole landscape is quite different under the pressure of invading individualism and globalization of economies and communication, and the gradual exclusion of any reference to the spiritual. The judiciary followed this evolution. The European Court for Human Rights regularly interprets human rights in the light of the right to privacy, Article 8 of the Convention. Individual desires become rights. Minorities impose their way of thinking and living, challenging the very notion that common patterns of human morality do exist. So if Europe may start again in a new dynamic, it can only start from the individual person. Institutions work perfectly, but they are unable to create or maintain a European spirit. Patient Europe can be born again through those citizens who are more aware of the threat of losing what makes up our civilization. The pandemic has shown our radical biological weakness, and the climate change raises questions of the survival of the planet. Human beings are in search of fulfillment and happiness. The materialistic environment of this last half century does not satisfy anybody. The growing estrangement of European nations, each one looking after its own security, does not invite to major cooperation. In perfect respect for those who do not believe in God, the Church's social doctrine tried to offer a space of debate about building confidence and sharing common values based on our very humanity. This offer seems not to have lost its relevance. What is at stake is the survival of European civilization. If this concept of civilization has faded away in the official discourse, the need to concentrate on this substantive subject is paramount. Civilization means a way of life flowing from principles and values that appear as undisputable. In contemporary Europe, everything seems disputable, except that there is no truth valid for all. Our common horizon is now that there is no horizon. Starting from the individual, such an original compound would focus on the human person, the family, and the nation. As for the human person, it seems urgent to give voice to those who share knowledge about neurosciences and quantum physics. The battle of civilization and of Europe rests on the assumption that the spirit leads the evolution and operates behind the material processes. Human beings are soul, body, and spirit. Without the spirit, we can drop all further research to give new impetus to our culture. The spirit is what makes us human beings. The materialist mainstream proposes no future worth being mentioned. The dialogue between the church and modern society runs on the question of anthropology. The process of globalization has absorbed nearly all energy left into saving the economy, which is a big deal, but not all the challenge. Second, the family. The family does no longer fulfill the criteria of the foundational European conventions. There is no place here to complain about such an evolution. What is permitted by law meets the set of values of a part of the European population, but not of all. Families who deem correct to foster traditional values in matters of marriage, transmission of life.
Excuse me for interruption, Your Excellency. We need to leave space for discussion. So please, if you could wrap up.
What do you mean? Should I stop here or conclude?
Conclude.
Okay. So after having spoken of the family, the nation, which is which is not against a supranational structure, I complete by few words. Realistically, the call for a revival of European civilization can be urged in the way we deal with the climate change. Our common existence is jeopardized. Refusing the speciesist approach, the materialist surrender to the big data, the diffidence towards the human beings as stewards of the creation, Europe would consolidate itself, facing its future with its own spiritual equipment, and so give the world a sign of hope and freedom. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellency.